to do with my hands. Why am I so bad at this? Hey friends, it is Sam from DIY Huntress, and today I'm going to show you how I created some super simple organization projects for my workshop using scrap wood. That's all I got. Let's get started. I partnered up with my friends at Brother to help make these projects come to life. Now that the larger part of this shed shop makeover is done, it was finally time to start focusing on getting the smaller stuff in my space organized. Luckily, I have tons of scrap wood left over from that renovation project, and I wanted to put it to good use by making a couple of different organization projects for my space. So the first thing that I really wanted to tackle was taking care of all of the battery chargers that I have in my workshop, because I work with a ton of different tools. A lot of people always ask me this question of like, why do you work with so many different brands of tools? And it's because I just think each one has their strengths. And after seeing Evan and Caitlin make a really awesome charging station that hid all of the wires behind a panel essentially, I knew that I wanted to do something similar. So I grabbed a piece of leftover plywood and I got started. First thing I did was I laid out where I wanted all of the chargers to go and trace them out onto the piece of plywood, and then I trimmed that plywood using a circular saw. I wanted to make this as compact as possible because I don't have a ton of space to store these things on the wall, so I tried to just kind of store them or trace these things as close to each other as possible. Now, one thing that I absolutely loved about Evan and Caitlin's design was that all of the charging cords for their chargers were out of sight, out of mind, hidden behind this box. So I kind of wanted to have a similar vibe with my project. And I did this by building an actual frame for my plywood to sit on top of. I cut these pieces down to about 3 inches tall on my table saw and then joined them together using pocket hole screws and wood glue. Now, I don't want to store any batteries on this charging station or in this charging station. I have room in my workbenches for that, so this is literally just to house any wires from the chargers as well as house the power strip itself. And in order to hang this box on the wall, I did add these supports to the back using pocket hole screws, and I will be screwing the screws directly into the wall from these strips. So once that frame was built, it was time to start cutting all of the openings for the wires to go for my chargers, and I did this using a Forstner bit, but as always, you can find the full list of materials and tools that I use for this project by clicking on the link below this video and checking out my website. Once all of the openings were drilled, it was time to start mounting all of the chargers to the actual charging station. And I did this by using a little trick where you use some painter's tape, you place it on the back of the charger, mark where all of the screws need to go, as well as portions of the silhouette of the charger. I then matched those up to the shapes that I traced earlier in the process, drilled in those screws, and then ran a dry fit for all of these chargers just to make sure that everything was going to line up before I actually finish this thing and make it look nicer than a random piece of scrap plywood. But after I was happy with that fit, I then sanded down the entire charging station, and I decided to give it this gray tone stain just to kind of match the vibe of the rest of the workshop, and then I just let it dry before moving on to the next step. Once everything had dried, I put all of the screws back into all of the openings, and I decided that I wanted an easy way to access the power strip in case I needed to unplug anything or just needed to organize my wires. And I did this by adding a couple of really simple hinges to one side of the box that I created, and this will allow me to just open this up kind of like a breaker box so that I can access the power strip. I also decided to add a little locking mechanism and some magnets to the other side of the door. That way it would stay closed once it's hanging on the wall. The last thing I needed to do before I could hang this thing was actually add one more opening for the cord for the power strip to go through, and I'm kind of an idiot and kicking myself because I could have just really notched out a little piece in the back for this and decided to make a very big opening instead. It ended up working, it just doesn't look as nice, but whatever, it's fine. At this point though, the actual construction portion of this project was done and it was time to hang this thing up on the wall, and I did that exactly how I mentioned earlier by screwing in screws directly through those supports and into the wall. I also took some time here to then attach the power strip to the wall as well, using that same painter's tape trick that I used earlier in this project. And I added a little hook to the inside so that the wires would not hang down, and instead they just tucked on up there nice and neat. After installing the charging station, it was time to then attach all of those chargers back on to those screw heads, and then I was able to thread all of the cords through the holes that I drilled earlier in the process. But because there were so many different wires, I wanted to make organizing and identifying all of these wires super easy when you open up this entire unit. So to do that, I partnered up with Brother to try their P-Touch Pro to make some really awesome labels for all of the wires, so I know exactly what I'm plugging in and unplugging whenever I open up that cabinet. Honestly, this system made making labels so easy because they had one-touch buttons for different types of cable wraps, cable flags, faceplate, serial numbers. There were just so many. And I was able to choose from 3 different fonts, about 300 different symbols, and I was also able to choose how big I wanted the font to be. So these labels were fully customizable and they printed perfectly every single time. The label tapes also come with an adhesive backing, so I was able to peel away the back and then apply the label directly to the wires, and they stuck on there really, really well, and now I'm able to identify exactly what plug goes where without having to look back and forth and continually open and close the cabinet. I am honestly so charged up about how this charging station turned out, and honestly, it only took me a weekend to complete and made a huge difference in my workshop. So now that the chargers were off the floor and off my workbenches and out of my way, it was then time to focus on some smaller organization items such as drawer organization. In my previous shed shop setup, I had these bins that were able to attach to my pegboard, and that is where I kept all of my brad nails. But because I don't have that pegboard anymore, I want to keep my brad nails inside of the drawers now. So I decided to grab a couple of scraps and basically whip up a pretty simple box where I could divide all of the brad nails into these boxes by size, and they would fit neatly into my workbench drawers. So to do this, I measured how deep my drawers were, and then I took some scrap wood over to my table saw, cut them down into some side pieces as well as a bottom piece, and then I glued and nailed these pieces together to make one large box. I then cut smaller divider pieces on my miter saw and attached those into the center of the box using brad nails and wood glue as well. At this point, it was time to grab that P-Touch Pro and make some labels for these brad nails. This thing has been awesome for organizing pretty much everything in my workshop, especially small bins like this one. I just printed out the sizes that I needed, and I did them in a smaller font, and I was able to attach them right to the dividers. I'm actually super excited about this because I'm able to make these little boxes for pretty much anything that I want in my workshop, especially now that I have this label maker, and I will definitely never be grabbing the wrong size brad nail ever again because they are clearly labeled. So there was one last spot in my workshop I really wanted to organize while I was on this organization kick, and that is my sandpaper drawer. So for a long time, I was using these plastic takeout containers to store all of my sandpaper, but the sandpaper actually doesn't fit in there perfectly, so it was always kind of a hot mess. So I decided to take those storage containers out of the drawer and instead build something custom. And this was a great one because after I had ripped all of the pieces I needed from my scrap wood pile down on my table saw, I actually didn't need to use any other power tools to make this happen. I just fit these pieces into the drawer, and then once they were all where they needed to be, I then glued them together and clamped them and just allowed them to dry, and that worked perfectly. So if you've been following me for a while, you will know how much I love projects that allow you to multitask. So while everything was drying, I used my P-Touch Pro label maker again to make labels for all of the different grits of sandpaper. And what I love about this is that because there are so many different symbols you can choose from, I was able to choose these arrow symbols. I love arrows that could be put on the same exact label that could basically tell me exactly which grit sandpaper I'm grabbing based on where the arrow points. I cannot tell you how many times this entire system of labeled sandpaper has come in handy since I actually made this project. It's been pretty awesome, and I don't know why I didn't do this sooner. Now that my shed shop makeover is complete, I am on a serious mission to keep it organized, and making these 3 projects alone really helped me get my act together in here. It has been such a game changer to be able to know exactly where things are and to be able to hide a lot of my clutter in an organized way. It also doesn't hurt that all of these projects literally took me 1 weekend to make, and I didn't even spend anything on the lumber because I was able to use scrap wood from my workshop. I really hope that this video is helpful for anybody who is looking to organize their workshop or their small workspace. If it was, please make sure to leave me a thumbs up and a comment below. Also, I do hope that you will subscribe to my channel for more projects in the very near future. There are a lot of cool things happening on the channel this summer that I cannot wait to share with you. But as always, friends, for now, thank you so much for hanging out with me while I build on this channel and for just being awesome. I will see you all very soon with a new project. And until then, friends, happy DIYing.